In August 1998, Sergeant Gary Silk and Senior Constable Rodney Miller were shot dead by men now imprisoned for their killings. 10 years before, in 1988, two young constables, Stephen Tynan and Damien Eyre, were also shot dead.
2 members down, urgent.
Roger, need ambulance?
Urgent, yes, ambulance, please. 2 members down.
A city in shock over the brutal execution of two young policemen. The victims from families with a strong police background, and the slayings described as the worst since the Kelly gang murders last century. Good evening, I'm Brian Naylor, and that report dominates our bulletin. There's a massive police hunt for the killers who senselessly slaughtered two young policemen on a routine job in South Yarra at dawn today. They died from shotgun blasts to the head and back as they checked an abandoned car. Michael Venus begins our coverage of an ambush that has shocked Victoria.
Sorry, a moment, if you can slip down to Walsh Street in South Yarra. Just there's a white Holden sedan, not knowing what the rego is. Got the lights on and the smashed windows in the middle of the road.
Yeah, transfer 11 received that, 26483.
With that seemingly routine transmission, a tragic sequence of events began to unfold. 22-year-old Constable Stephen John Tynan and his younger partner, probationary Constable Damon Jeffrey Eyre, rolled out of Paran Police Station in their divisional van. They headed to exclusive Walsh Street, South Yarra, near the Botanical Gardens, on the fringe of the city. The first indication that they'd driven into a perilous position came from local residents.
South Melbourne 150, I sent Paran 311 down to Walsh Street. Since then I've had about 3 or 4 cars come down saying that they've heard shots fired in that street, and I can't get Paran 311 at this stage.
As other units converged on the confusion, this chilling message confirmed the worst fears of police.
250, 2 members down, urgent.
Roger, need ambulance?
50, urgent, yes, ambulance, please. 2 members down.
Police believe the officers were both struck down by single blasts from a double-barrel shotgun. Senior Constable Tynan was hit in the head as he inspected the stolen car's interior, and Constable Eyre blasted in the back as he looked on from outside. He was shot twice more, possibly with his own service revolver, which is now missing. A nurse living in a nearby flat attempted to administer emergency first aid as both officers lay dying. Rod Taylor, who lives opposite, heard shouting for several seconds before the gunfire rang out.
I didn't look out my window immediately. I looked out maybe 5 minutes later because I was afraid a bullet might come through my window. And I saw one of the neighbours' Commodores parked dead in the middle of the street with the doors wide open. I recognised it immediately. And the police car was behind that with its lights on and its engine running, and then I saw a body on the road next to the Commodore, which was one of the policemen's. And I believe the other policeman was actually inside the Commodore.
The gunman was last seen fleeing over the fence of a nearby block of flats. The two policemen died before they reached local hospitals. With much of the suburb sealed off, police then began a house-to-house search for the gunman. They were also looking for a weapon he may have dumped as he fled. Local schools were also immediately checked, as were all surrounding parks and gardens. Police teams also scoured the banks of the Yarra, while early morning motorists were stopped and asked for help. Later, police chiefs attempted to put the slayings into some sort of perspective.
Certainly the worst incident of its type in my memory. In fact, it's only the second multiple killing of police in this state. The last one was in 1878 when the Kelly gang shot Lonigan, Kennedy and Scanlon at Stringy Bark Creek.
And Premier Keane summed up the feelings of revulsion felt by all Victorians.
I think the whole community is outraged. It makes us again realise the hard job the police have to do, and how they are always at risk in any situation that they attend as our protectors.
20-year-old trainee Constable Eyre only went to the police academy last December. It was his lifelong ambition to follow his father into the police force, as his brother and sister-in-law had done. Tonight, he is the 7th policeman to be murdered while on duty in Victoria in the last 9 years. For Constable Tynan, today's tragic end comes only 11 days after he was involved in a shootout with two bandits who'd taken a woman hostage during a TAB hold-up in South Yarra. Both bandits were shot by police, one being left a paraplegic. Ironically, because he was upset by those events, he was asked if he wanted to come off night shift. His dedication wouldn't allow it, and he declined Today he died just over an hour before that shift ended.
The last man to hang in Australia was Ronald Ryan. Ryan, a Catholic, died at 8:02 in the morning, Friday, February 3, 1967. It was the feast day of St Blaise. Charged with the murder of a prison warder during an escape from Melbourne's Pentridge jail with accomplice Peter Walker, Ryan gets the death sentence. But it was Victoria's cabinet, iron-fistedly ruled by Premier Henry Bolte, that wrote "finish" to the words of Justice Stark.
Ronald Joseph Ryan, the order of the court is that you be taken from here to the place from whence you came, and from there, at a time to be fixed by His Excellency the Governor, you be taken to a place of execution, and there you be hanged by the neck until you are dead. And may God have mercy on your soul.
If God had mercy on his soul, then life showed precious little mercy for Ronald Ryan. His first crime, if you can call it that, is to be born poor. He spent his early childhood in Mitcham on the outskirts of Melbourne in the late 20s and 30s, when the world is in the grip of the Great Depression. Even in a community where an empty belly is commonplace, the daily poverty of the Ryans is extreme. Ronald Ryan, barefoot, dirty and hungry, already a fringe dweller, like his father, born a loser. Ryan is 35 when he has his first touch of these old bluestone walls. It's the start of a relationship that will shape the life and the death of Ronald Ryan.
Peter Walker, a young, tough-minded armed robber, is naturally drawn to Ryan. They build a strong mateship, a bond that keeps them together through the trauma of a prison escape and a trial, and almost takes them both to the gallows.
Actually, we were sitting in the yard and Ronnie pointed up at the tower and he said, "What do you think about going through there?" And I looked up and all I could see was this guard standing on top of a tower. And I said to him, "Geez, a bit bloody rude, going through there." And he said, "Well, take a look at it and what do you think?" And over a few weeks, looking at it, it looked feasible. It could be done.
And so it could. Picture, if you will, the oppressive heat of a Melbourne summer, just a few days before Christmas. Ryan senses the opportunity. It's just after lunch. Armed guards in 3 towers are the first threat. The first 2 are sitting down out of sight, probably reading. The third is standing in Tower 1, lost in a daydream. Using a makeshift ladder and a grappling hook at the end of a rope of knotted sheets, Ryan and Walker are quickly outside the guard tower, on top of the outer wall. The sheer audacity of the breakout takes prison officer Helmut Langer completely by surprise. And before he knows what's happening, Ryan has his M1 carbine. In the next furious moments, they're running from the prison.
Oh, you're going 1 million miles an hour. Everything's going. You're very attuned to what's going around you, and everything's going at top speed, tremendous speed. It's hard to. It's very hard to put it in words. It's just actions in split seconds that are going off one after the other. And in a situation like that, you learn to read the other bloke. That bloke's doing something, and you've got to do this, and it's just, you read those actions. And there was, as I said, there were very few words spoken in the whole escape. Then I looked around and saw Ron down that way, so I've headed back up. That's when I've looked up and the bloke in the tower's aiming at me. And then George Hodson's materialised wherever he came from, the officer.
Between you and Ryan, or?
Yeah, between me and Ryan. So I've gone out across Sydney Road and up back towards where Ron was.
What stage was the shot fired?
Oh, we would have had a couple of cars in between us, around about that stage.
Did you see it, or did you just...
No, I didn't see it. I don't even think I hardly heard it. There was that much noise, there was cars and everything else going, and people jumping in and out of cars and slamming doors and looking around, and it was quite a little bit of turmoil going on out there.
Do you think now that Ryan intended to shoot or in fact Ryan did shoot Hodson?
Well, I don't think Ryan shot at all.
You don't think he fired a shot?
Not at all. See, the whole thing is that he'd been fooling around with the gun on the road because he left a live round of ammunition on the road. So that meant that there had to have been something wrong with the gun. It was jammed or something like that. So he's fooled around with it there.
What stage did you realise that Hodson was dead?
We didn't believe it until we saw it on television.
The already massive manhunt intensifies. Squads of heavily armed police carry out a series of raids across Melbourne. By now, a frightened city. That fear is heightened by the message the media is spreading.
Well, I don't think they can achieve much at all now. They've escaped convicts. There are 2 murders credited to them, and I can't see what future there is in this Australian country for them at all.
Have you any other thoughts as to what they might do or attempt to do, rob a bank or a TAB office?
We feel that they might make an effort to obtain more money with the faint hope of leaving Australia, but we are taking every precaution to prevent them getting any money from any establishment which might be open today.
Well, I walked into the bank to pay in some money, and a young fellow bobbed up from the teller's desk and said, "Don't move or I'll shoot." I thought it was a joke, and I thought, what a funny Christmas joke. But then an elder man came from the vault where he'd just locked the staff in, evidently, and he said, "Yes, that's right, lady, we're the escapees and we're desperate." And he said, "We definitely will shoot, Sheriff."
With part of the £4,000 haul from the bank, they buy a car. And as bold as brass, they drive straight up the Hume Highway to Sydney. Sydney is as far as they get. They make a basic mistake. Ryan is recognised. A police trap is set, and after 17 days on the run, they're back in custody and on their way to Melbourne. Ryan has gambled and lost again. The trial of Ronald Ryan and Peter Walker becomes one of the most celebrated in Melbourne's legal history. It lasts 15 days and ends on March the 30th, 1966, with Walker guilty of the manslaughter of Hodson and Ryan guilty of the murder of Hodson. Ryan's counsel, Philip Opus QC, has failed to convince the jury that his client had not fired the fatal shot.
On the other hand, nothing has altered the view of the man who was governor of Pentridge at the time.
Well, Ryan told me that he fired the shot. And he fired the shot to stop him, not to kill him. He fired the shot, hit him in the left shoulder. And I believe that's where he did hit him. And I believe that he told me the truth.
Walker is sentenced to 12 years jail. Ryan is sentenced to death. It is one of those bitter twists of fate that the man who passes the last death sentence to be carried out in this country is not a hanging judge.
All my adult life, I've been an opponent of capital punishment. It was my very great misfortune that merely by chance, that was the way the roster was, that Ryan's case came to the head of the list when I was sitting in crime. It was just my bad luck, if you could call it that.
Do you regard it that way?
Oh, it was a most terrible experience as far as I was concerned. The passing of the sentence. How would you like to sit opposite a fellow human being and pronounce the dreadful formula of the death sentence, which has the effect of extinguishing another human being's life?
You look back at it and it's almost like a play, you know. In your mind, you're sort of not believing it's true, but you know that it is, that this is actually happening. And then you've got somebody sitting up there and he puts a piece of black cloth on his head and he sentences your friend to death. And then they go sort of, it's all sort of like a ritual. You don't know if it's medieval or what it is. And then you go through this and then they take that person, that human being, back to a jail, to a little compound. He's in a cell, 10 feet long by 8 feet wide sort of business, if that, or 9 by 6 or something, I think it is. And then from there he's taken into a little yard it's a cage, and that's all you could call it. It is a cage. Wire and steel over the head, and bricks all around you and a solid door in the front of it. It's a cage. And they virtually, you don't exercise or anything like that, and they just feed you and fatten you up like the Christmas turkey, and then put a rope around your neck and break your neck. You know, just like they do the Christmas chook.
The Cabinet is satisfied that there are no reasons why the sentence pronounced by the court should not be carried out. The sentence of death will be carried out at 8 a.m. on Friday, the 3rd of February 1967.
Ryan has 20 hours to live. John Brosnan, the Catholic chaplain at Pentridge, will spend the final hour with him.
I've never seen anyone more certain he was going somewhere than he was that day.
Where did he think he was going?
Well, he thought he was going to go to judgment, and he expected an understanding judgment. And he expressed it in this way: who do you want me to remind you to? To whom do you want me to remind you? I said, 2 people, my father and Daniel Mannix. And tell Daniel I was faithful to his memory. Daniel was a great abolitionist for capital punishment. And that certainty that he had there. See, when they asked him would he have breakfast, his reply to that was good, because you'd be joking when you're wasting good food. I believe he had a drink of whiskey. That was all he had. They gave him that.
Ryan comes from the death cell. A few steps to the gallows, and this is where it was. A few minutes earlier, he looked at his old mate, Father Brosnan, and wondered out loud, what's better, this or 30 years in this loveless environment?
I stayed below and I waited, and I was as close to the execution as I am to you. I was as close to the hangman as I am to you, and I'm proud to say that I turned my back on both. I was present and did not see it. I would say this also as an abolitionist. I don't know about other forms of capital punishment, but if people do execute, I think hanging is probably the most humane if it's done properly. He did not move 1 inch from that when the body fell, and I anointed him.
Ryan is buried in an unmarked grave inside the prison walls. Great passions have been aroused. Men who have been touched by this tragedy will never be the same again.
In a letter to a friend a few days before he died, Ryan wrote, "It is an oft-repeated thought of mine that we could each do with 2 lifetimes on this earth. Then we could benefit from our mistakes and live closer to the 10 Commandments."
Australia has had rogues, scoundrels and carpetbaggers since the First Fleet. It's no wonder then that old habits die hard. In the 50s and 60s, Melbourne had Stanley Corman. In the 80s, there was a truly national group, including Laurie Connell, Alan Bond, George Herskew, Brian Yule, Russell Goward and Christopher Skase. Just recently, there have been a few others.
Brad Keeling, bonuses made him and co-founder Jody rich. OneTel $7 million men. Mr Keeling today detailed how in the first 3 months of last year, because of computer problems, OneTel was choking, struggling to send out bills, and when they did, they were often outdated. Extra staff had to man call centres. Some customers just refused to pay their bills. It got so bad that on the 22nd of March, Keeling received a phone call from Kerry Packer, whose PBL had invested hundreds of millions of dollars in OneTel. Keeling said, "I recall he was fairly concerned. He said if we don't fix it, it could be fatal." 2 months later, OneTel collapsed. After the collapse, former director James Packer said he was profoundly misled by OneTel's management. Today, Brad Keeling said he kept Mr Packer informed nearly every day in March last year. Far from hiding OneTel's problems, he said he gave Mr Packer a pessimistic forecast for the company's cash target for that month. Brad Keeling also contradicted evidence given yesterday by former director Rodney Adler. Mr Adler said at a September 2000 meeting, Jody Rich and Keeling were asked by James Packer to give the $14 million worth of bonuses back. Mr Keeling today said the request was never made. By contrast, he said there was a strong feeling of support for him and Jody Rich.
And what about HIH? The inquiry into its collapse fills 4,326 pages.
He was the man who created a corporate giant, then steered it into oblivion.
No, I'm just delighted to be able to have the opportunity to appear at the Commission with my side of the story.
Ray Williams began giving evidence on day 129 of the Royal Commission. He's been called to account for the nation's biggest corporate collapse. HIH had debts of more than $5 billion. Its former boss has had plenty of time to carefully choose his words, and today he made it clear he wouldn't hide from blame.
I would like to make it clear that I accept my share of the responsibility for the failure of HIH.
Attempting to mend a savage reputation, Ray Williams admitted making errors of judgment, although he said they were in good faith.
I may have been foolish and perhaps at times gullible, but I never acted dishonestly. I did not lie, I did not deceive, and I did not seek, nor did I receive any improper benefits.
Mr Williams told the Commission the death knell for HIH was its purchase of competitor FAI, claiming he was deceived over the true financial state of the company, which he said had hidden losses of more than $200 million. Nina Stevens, National 9 News.
Undoubtedly the most vilified of all the money entrepreneurs of the 80s was Christopher Skase. He fled to Mallorca in 1991 after Quintex, his company, failed. He left behind debts of $1.5 billion. Skase fought extradition by saying he was dying, and die he did eventually of stomach cancer. But for 12 years, the Australian news media followed his every move and that of his wife, Pixie.
Here we go.
You sick, poisonous individual. Sick. You are absolutely sick. How could you do this? This man
Focal the camera.
Sorry?
I know it's not
Camera,
from
go.
the bad Justice Ministry. She obviously condones this sort of disgusting behaviour. Get out!
He was always on the run. Christopher Skase's drive and ambition was to take him from an early career as a finance reporter to the dizziest heights of 1980s wheeling and dealing.
They'll remember him as the great villain of the 80s.
He began in the mid-70s by buying a small Victorian tin company. Within a decade, Christopher Skase and his wife Pixie had turned Quintex into a major player, owning a national media empire and a glittering chain of resorts. Both the name and the corporate slogan to prove faithful.
Too good to be true.
The resorts boomed, encouraging him to move on, buying the 7 television network.
We signed this at 2:30 this morning, and I've had about 45 minutes sleep, so I feel like a humble finance journalist this morning.
The ambition didn't stop within Australia. Mr Skase wanted to go global and made a bid for the entire MGM, movie, TV, resort and entertainment network. But it was then that the rot set in. Unable to meet instalment payments for the 7 network, he also had to abandon the MGM bid, and corporate watchdogs began asking how Mr Skase and his executives could continue paying themselves millions of dollars in management fees while their companies were going belly up. At that point in 1990, Mr Skase and wife Pixie moved to Mallorca. That coincided with the Australian Securities Commission decision to lay 32 charges of corrupt business behaviour against him. He also left behind the wreckage of numerous companies, corporate debts of $2 billion.
I am not guilty. No question. Not guilty. Absolutely not.
A man who had things gone just very slightly differently would today be mourned as one of Australia's great business leaders.
And he also fought off repeated attempts by the Australian government to bring him home, even claiming attempted abduction.
Well, they weren't kidnapping me to take me on a vacation.
And always he was too ill to travel.
I am in the terminal category.
Once during the extradition battles, he was briefly jailed.
Okay, we're here, we're back. All right.
Then triumphantly released to his family when the Spanish authorities supported his claims of illness. Right to the end, Christopher's case survived everything except the one process that was simply beyond his control. Peter Harvey, National 9 News.
Hours after his death, the Skase villa on the island hideaway of Mallorca appeared deserted. His body taken to a private cemetery to be prepared for cremation, possibly as soon as tomorrow. This was Skase 3 weeks ago during one of his regular hospital visits. Up until last Friday, he'd been receiving chemotherapy, but his condition had deteriorated so badly, his doctors knew they could do no more.
This situation, in this irreversible situation, I prefer he stay with his family.
Mallorca's English newspaper, the Daily Bulletin, broke the news when his relatives placed a death notice.
The family have been particularly angry over the accusations of being liars and the reports that he wasn't sick and the pictures were fake.
Skase's doctor says the 53-year-old died from stomach cancer, which had spread to his pancreas and lungs. He said there would be no need for an autopsy.
It's not necessary because the cause is very clear for us.
The Australian government is not requesting its own sighting of Christopher Skase's body.
We're reliant on the advice from the Spanish government, and that is sufficient.
In his last interview 2 weeks ago, Skase told New Idea reporter Sue Smethurst he blamed the Australian government's relentless pursuit for his disease.
He feels that the chasing and the stress ultimately brought on his cancer and has come around to get him in the end.
Even in death, it appears Skase won't be returning to Australia, instead choosing to be cremated here in Mallorca and have his ashes secretly scattered so his grave doesn't become a tourist attraction. Wife Pixie has also sworn never to return, fearing she'd be treated as a freak in her former homeland. Damien Ryan, National 9 News.
Skase may be dead, but his illegal millions remain very much alive.
Look, his death doesn't change anything other than it eliminates that line of inquiry.
For 10 years, Max Donnelly has pursued the Skase money. The government has confirmed that chase, which has already cost taxpayers $3 million, will go on.
Well, there's a legitimate public interest in that, yes.
The private trustee has been funded to bring recovery action. His mandate will continue.
Skase's trustee in bankruptcy says he knows for certain the fugitive got away with at least $10 million and perhaps as much as $100 million. Neither Skase's widow Pixie nor his son-in-law Tony Larkins will be able to return to Australia without expecting to face the law. Tony Larkins now holds the key. He appears to control Skase's pilfered fortune, and there is a warrant for his arrest. Pixie faces a court examination if she ever returns to Australia, while her daughter Amanda, Larkins' wife, laundered cash through her bank accounts.
In terms of our investigations, the obvious person that I want to speak to is Tony Larkins.
At the time of his death this morning, Skase was facing active inquiries in Britain, Spain and the Cayman Islands. Whether with his death his family will show similar skills in avoiding Australian justice is an open question.
I don't know if he wouldn't have been better off facing the music 10 years ago and either winning or losing.
Hugh Rimmington, National 9 News.
And then